Social Development is proposing that workers be forced to pay it up to 12% of their salaries. It published a green paper on Wednesday saying that it will provide retirement, disability and unemployment benefits for those who do not have cover. The reform has been met with a lot of criticism. Joining me now is investment expert John Anderson from Alexander Forbes. John, good morning. Thank you very much for your time. So firstly, it's a green paper, but we understand it hasn't been given the green light yet, and it was published or put into the public sphere possibly a little bit prematurely. What is your feeling on how worried we should be about this possible bill just yet?
Yeah, I think it came as quite a surprise, I think, to a lot of stakeholders. And also government has also come out, different departments, the National Treasury has come out to say that it's not it's not government policy, and also it hasn't gone through any affordability assessment. So I think at this stage there's nothing to be worried about. I think this is something that has been on the cards for close on a decade. In fact, the proposals are quite similar to what was proposed 9 years ago. It doesn't take into account any enhancements in the industry over the last 9 years. But the reality is that our priorities in the country are different. We need to grow. But they have come out to say that, a significant consultation still needs to take place. And we think that there's going to be a very different proposal that needs to come out. It's just disappointing that it comes out at a time when our focus needs to be, somewhere else.
What do you think we should be focused on at the moment?
Definitely growth. So the main thing is, the proposal essentially revolves around providing pensions for informal individuals, people that are working, that haven't got cover, but also changing the nature of people that already have cover, that's already working very well, but changing it significantly and essentially exchanging, a pension promise today that you've got an asset and accumulated savings, and in the new arrangement, will be a promise by the government in future, which I don't think most people will actually accept, because you need trust, in the system. So where we need to focus on is growth. We need to focus on jobs, because you can't do all these things. If you don't have jobs, you don't have growth. The proposals also come with an additional tax, to subsidize lower income earners and informal sector. We can't afford that. If you look at NHI, if you look at things that we need to now do with COVID, some of the shorter term relief that's needed, those are the areas that actually need focus and attention. But, unfortunately, the proposal itself isn't well considered and, is really impractical in our view as well.
John, it's nice to talk about this rationally and calmly. A lot of reaction to this announcement has not been very calm at all. Many South Africans outraged, saying, well, the government can't effectively administer my tax money as a very basic starting point. Why should I give them another 12% of my salary for that to be looted as well?
Yeah, so look, pensions are an emotional issue, and it's quite rightly so. People work for many, many years, and they defer their consumption. So instead of spending the money today, you're putting it away for a time in future. So there's a lot of trust that is needed, in managing it. A lot of trust that, your pension will be paid. And at this stage, I think we can all agree, trust in the government capabilities. The track record speaks for itself in this. So I think that's quite a valid concern. I think what one can do, though, is there is a very good private sector that, runs quite well. It has had its shortcomings, quite rightly identified in the paper, but that was 9 years ago. And I think a lot of that has actually been addressed. So you can actually leverage off a very well-run private sector to assist in closing the gaps, and that's actually where the focus needs to be, instead of a complete overhaul. But trust is very important in pensions, and we've seen it in all countries. You don't want to be messing with people's money. They need trust. where it has worked, where government has been running these very successfully, there is trust in the government. But I don't think we're there at this stage, in the South African context.
John, this proposed green paper has serious long-term implications for that private sector that you were talking about, some from within the industry calling it anti-competitive. What impact would that have on existing investment funds?
So if it does go ahead, which looks very unlikely, but if it does, I mean, we've done some work just to have a look at, we're the largest pension administrator in the country, and about 60% of the funds that we administer, those individuals fall under the threshold, which is 276,000 rand salary per annum. So 60% of individuals that are currently employed will fall fully under the state scheme. So obviously that means a significant a reduction in the private sector managed by the state scheme. The private sector then becomes top-up scheme. So for people with salaries above 276,000, you can then top up according to the proposal with the additional savings through your employer or as an individual. So the private sector becomes more top-up schemes rather than managing for that 60%. The implications, though, for the individuals are those 60%, currently they have funds through employer. The employer plays a big role in making sure that things are done properly, things are administered well, that the right things happen. You actually lose all of those benefits by it being run, through through the state scheme. So I think a lot of those things need to be thought through. Bottom line is there'll be a significant impact. Also, at the moment, the private sector there's a lot of diversification in terms of providers. So if something goes wrong in a specific union or employer or a specific scheme, it's isolated to that scheme. So whereas in this particular instance, you'll have a very big fund. If something goes wrong there, for example, like things like we had with the social grants, UIF, TERS, any of those things, it affects everybody on scale. And I think there's a huge risk of that. And also then there's no competition. Whereas at the moment in the private sector, there's a lot of competition. And in the last number of years, I think a lot of innovation, in fact, there's certain, funds and providers that actually provide admin at a zero fee. You don't get much lower than zero. So there's a lot of competition, in fact. In the new arrangement, there will be no competition for the government scheme.